Thanks very much, and thanks for bearing with me so shortly before the coffee break. That's always quite an exercise. I wanted to put a number of slides together, which are hopefully not what you expect from a lawyer, because we tend to put text on slides rather than pictures, and I try to find some slides that are a bit more entertaining before coffee break. When it comes to advising cleantech startups, we're looking also on cleantech startups from the venture capital investors' point of view as legal advisors. The question is always, is it all about money or is it also about other stuff? It's certainly all about VC when you look at the maturity stage of the companies that are in this room. And to remind you of sort of the life cycle of companies as it could look like, and I'm saying as it could look like because that's just an example, and each and every individual cleantech startup is, of course, a very individual lifetime cycle. You will usually start off in seed phase with founders financing business angels, financing seed stage investors, then coming to a bit more of a maturity stage where you find venture capital investors, including later on strategic investors. And what is important when you look at cleantech startups from a legal perspective and also from a tax perspective is to understand that everything around cleantech startups, as very much so for digital business startups or medical startups, is exit driven. We experience in our practice that this is not common understanding. There are always founders around who are looking out for investors who do not share this common understanding with the investors that everything should be exit driven. And whatever exit means, exit can be next stage financing, exit can be a trade sale, can be a corporation. But certainly something that leads to an exit from the investment by the investor at some stage and in a reasonable period of time. So in order to understand what we're doing and when looking at a contract for venture capital cleantech startup investments, it's very important to understand that everything around this is exit driven. This is sort of predominant for what we're usually dealing with when looking at cleantech startups. The focus very much changes when you go across the lifetime cycle of the startup. In early stage, you will have a clear focus when dealing with due diligence processes, a clear focus on technology, for example. And when Carzep presented earlier today, the first question from the audience was, well, is this little device covered by a patent? Very important question and very much the focus. And not much else plays a major role in early stage due diligences. Whereas in later stage, the focus will be on IP, will be on software, but will also be on more related aspects, such as the transfer of IP by employees into the company. We'll get to this in a minute. Whereas later on, when you come to pre-exit stages, you could think of a private equity investor coming in, a strategic investor, corporate partner coming in, buying in to the company. You will usually end up in full scope due diligence, quite a hassle, quite a burden for management of the company. And you will get to more refined levels of participation, shareholders agreements, articles of association, and even share and purchase agreements. When we focus on cleantech startups, it's all about technology. And I found this is a very nice one where it says, I call my invention the wheel, but so far I haven't been unable to attract any venture capital. And perhaps one of the reasons could be that it either was more an idea rather than anything that could be protected under the legal regime, or, well, the idea was too blunt to be innovative. What we see when we come to due diligence processes on the investor side, looking into clean tech startups, very often is that the technology is everywhere, but in the company. And that's something I'm glad to see that so many startups are in this room. This is really an advice I cannot repeat often enough. Make sure that the technology is with the company from the very first day, basically. Make sure that whatever is invented and what is relevant for your business concept vests with the company, is transferred to the company, or if you do not manage to gain title to that patent or design patent or a trademark could be, but it's more about patents, of course, then at least make sure you have proper licenses agreements in place. Nothing is more disturbing from an investor's point of view than finding out in the course of due diligence that the core technology is not protected for the benefit of the company. This is a must, and it's probably the must, and everything around this, from a contractual point of view, uncertainties in customer contracts and supplier contracts, in employment contracts, or even in the existing shareholder structure, that can be fixed. But to fix a defect and default on the technology side is extremely difficult, will be a heavy burden on valuation discussions, and might even be a deal breaker in the end. I said that much of the contract structure is exit-driven, and I thought it would be useful not to run into any details, but to just flag those topics that you will usually face in discussions with venture capitalists, or looking at it from the venture capitalist side, of course, when dealing with technology startups. And in the shareholders and participation agreement, you will run into a number of provisions that you will not understand when you look at it first time. But then you will probably try and find out what is really relevant for our negotiations. And I try to sort of highlight those 6 where you will usually end up in discussions. The parties will negotiate, really, whereas there are others which are just market standard, and there's no sense in spending time on them because they are just what you get and take. And I mentioned subscription rights, voting rights, tag-along rights, drag-along rights. The right to IPO is something that a venture capital investor will always secure, as much as a preference when it comes to distributing profits from an exit, be it an IPO, be it a trade sale, or any other form of share sale. Now, one thing I could have mentioned here, and I should have mentioned had Jan me enlightened before that, is founders vesting. Founders vesting is a provision that is extremely important from an investor's point of view, to bind the core team to the company and make sure that it's purely exit-driven and stays on board until, well, at least until the investor thinks it's time for the founders to go. But certainly, the ideal phase would be until exit. And this brings me to the point that Jan mentioned, which is sort of keeping the employees incentivized to work towards exit, and that's sort of employment participation schemes that you can build. And what we usually run into is a discussion around taxes, basically. Taxes and social security contributions can be extremely difficult in order to give shares to employees of the company. And perhaps we can pick that up in a Q&A session, or during coffee break, of course. But what we find is that in the market standard, it has become much more common not to grant any direct shares and participations in the company to any employees except for founders, but to use virtual schemes. Virtual schemes meaning that employees will be treated, in the case of an exit, as if they had been shareholders in that company for the lifetime until exit. And I think that's probably something where we can take questions, and we'll be happy to share your experiences on this field. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great.